So, hello everybody, and welcome to our panel From Soil to Sea. So, my name is Philipp Gerbert, and some of the organizers want to introduce me, but they don't, so I'll introduce myself. I'm the CEO of the TUM Venture Labs, and I've worked on both artificial intelligence and climate action for many years, also with the entire German industry, and I have the pleasure of being your moderator today. So, we've already seen the pictures of Los Angeles last week. And I think it reinforced the fact that we are actually fighting on two fronts. On the one hand, we really try to prevent the climate catastrophe. But by now, that's actually not enough. At the same time, we have to dramatically increase our resilience because we have to survive and retain our ability to act. And in the panel today, we're going to explore nature-based solutions to do precisely that. On the first side, to really assure carbon capture, and on the other hand, make sure that we retain food security, which is arguably one of the most important resilience needs we have going forward. Now, the panel will actually be introduced quickly by Professor Farhah Assaad from the Life Science campus of the Technical University of Munich. So Farhah is by background a plant geneticist with a distinguished academic career, spent lots of time in the US, both on the East Coast at MIT and many years at the Carnegie Institute at Stanford. She always, in her research, also looked at how plants deal with environmental stress. And more recently, she has gone beyond academia and become a scientific enabler of farmers in the field, enabling nature-based solutions both for carbon capture and for food security. Farhah, we're looking forward to your introduction.
Briefly, to introduce the panel, tell you a story about how we can, on the one hand, do climate mitigation, food security, and also climate adaptation. And I'll introduce first one method, and then we'll move to the other panelists. So for climate mitigation and nature-based solution, we basically use photosynthesis, which captures carbon from the atmosphere and fixes it in sugars. And photosynthesis has the potential of absorbing about 80% of the obscene. Look at the red. If you look at the red, that's the obscene levels of emissions we had in 2023. Our land and ocean sinks together can compensate for about 80% of this. So clearly we have to reduce emissions, and that's what a lot of the people in the earlier talks have brilliant ideas for. But if we think about these 80% of the planet capacity, the oceans are part of the problem, but clearly the biggest sink here is forests. And the assumption from the BCG study here and from Griscom et al. Is that we'll be able to increase forest cover by reducing meat consumption, which is something we saw in the earlier panel. But it's really very challenging to increase surface cover for forests because it's in competition with agriculture and with conservation efforts for our organic soils. Unless, can we envisage food systems that mimic forests? And that is exactly what's being done by a Swiss farmer called Ernst Götsch, who acquired some land in Brazil that had once been Atlantic rainforest, but that after slash and burn had become desolate, arid climate. And he started with hardy pioneers on his degraded soils, and within 5 years he managed to have virgin rainforest species growing. That 20-fold acceleration over what the 100 years nature would need to go from a pioneer to a climax species, he did through active management or disturbance. This means pruning and mulching to create a thick layer of topsoil, capping the pioneer trees to flush their photosynthate deep into the subsoil, and pruning to enhance the strata, the trees, the shrubs, the herbaceous layers, and the ground cover to allow a maximum amount of light in and a maximum amount of foliage to capture that light, and so to maximize photosynthesis, which remains the rate-limiting step for carbon capture in the soil. With this, and with 100 edible species that he got from indigenous neighbors, he managed to have systems that are climate resilient, that restore critical soil functions and biodiversity, while being productive and potent carbon sinks. That's climate mitigation and food security. But where is the resilience coming from? Where is the adaptation coming from? That was the third question. Well, the topsoil, a thick layer of healthy topsoil, will absorb water if there's too much water, will be a reservoir for water if there's too little. The forest evapotranspiration will bring back the rains. And so you've brought humidity back to an arid climate. And with this, we have climate adaptation. Now, this is Brazil. We're here in Europe. And what we've been doing is we've been working with pilot projects all across Europe, and we have Lavine here in Africa working with us as well. And each of our pilot agroforestry, successional, or syntropic projects addresses a different challenge. In Denmark, where Christian is joining us from, we have the Baltic Sea being used as a bit of a dump for chemical fertilizers from pig farms, and it's dying. But our systems are putting to the test what the BCG report on soils said, which is the cheapest and most effective way of filtering water for clean water is healthy soils. And that's what we're trying before we dump water and run off into the Baltic. Then we'll hear from Lavine concepts for going from the oceans onto the land. In Bavaria, the emphasis in Nantes' book is peatlands and grasslands, different degrees of degradation of peatlands. We have soil compaction, we have soil depletion. In Puglia, plant disease has effectively been combated by healthy syntropic ecosystems. This is a huge achievement by Jan Gisbert Schulze, and also talk to him about how he's even involving the Pope. And here we have the biggest challenge. We have, down at the southern coast of Granada, 5 consecutive summers with 0 rain. The wells have run dry. We're envisaging, in conversation with Ernst Götsch, how to do a 0 irrigation scenario. And as we speak, Ryan and Karen are sourcing 93 native species to the Mediterranean coastal forests, so that the winds coming off the ocean can rain their moisture onto the land and fix the rain cycle that has been broken by the missing forests. Our living labs will act as test beds for innovation in frugal tech and in deep tech, mechanization, automation, soil amendments, light machinery, aerospace, and for this, I leave you with the 3 innovators and entrepreneurs on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm always so impressed, by your work already early with Ernst Götsch. You think of farmers slashing the Amazon, destroying the forest and the soil, and he takes arid land, rebuilds the Atlantic rainforest in record time, but much more biodiversity, and then everything is edible that he pets. So he kind of does the reverse. So I find that, that applied to Europe, I find totally impressive. Now, let's get the rest of the panel, our distinguished panel. First of all, Lavine Irvine, CEO of Coastal Biotech. Give a round of applause to Lavine. And Christian Brix Tillegreen, obviously green, yeah, the director of Planetary Health Venture at the BioInnovation Institute from the Novo Nordisk Foundation. Welcome on stage. Lavine, let's turn to you first. So I am always totally impressed. You know, here is a woman with African roots, going for the impact, starting a biotech company, bringing algae to soil, and making an impact on so many lives in Africa. Lavine, please tell us what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So the main focal point of Coastal Biotech is really centered around how macroalgae can be utilized as a feasible and really scalable strategy for rebalancing rebalancing the interplay, between land-based activities and our oceans. And because we target really the base of food production, because we're targeting the base of food production, we're really leveraging macroalgae as a way of decarbonizing, or a tool to decarbonize and support our food systems. So really, to achieve this, to achieve decarbonizing and supporting our food systems, our technology is really about deploying seaweed to land-based applications. And we do this by producing biostimulants and biochar. But really, why is macroalgae a key candidate for completing this mission? Well, on one side, macroalgae are photosynthetic machines, which means that they have enormous capacity for carbon capture. So to maybe put it in a bit more perspective, globally, seaweed farms, which is part of the work that we do, captures about 1.2 gigatons of CO2 annually, and about 56 million tons of that gets transported and locked into deep ocean sinks each year. There are, of course, alternative technologies such as geoengineering solutions, but they face enormous challenges, ethical challenges, environmental challenges, and even technical challenges. And so there's still a really long way to go. So really scaling up seaweed farms is a viable, and it's actually a really immediate option for long-term carbon capture. And on the other side, part of what we do is really closing the gap in terms of the climate adaptative solutions that farmers really need right now. And we do that by minimizing and reducing the amount of NPK usage, and in many ways actually absorbing a lot of the damage that it has caused. And another way that we're addressing this is by addressing the fact that NPK is no longer enough to actually meet the growth and developmental requirements for crop development. So, and because NPK is no longer enough to meet the growth and developmental requirements, it's the leading cause of crop failure. And so our solutions are really enabling crops to really meet their genetic potential and to not have crop loss, which is actually a huge factor in enabling food security globally, and specifically in Tanzania.
Very cool. So, you know, we're called from soil to sea, but she goes from sea to soil. It must be music to your eyes with the big, you know, algae bloom in the Baltic Sea. So, Christian, you know, BioInnovation Institute, powered by Novo Nordisk Foundation, is a lighthouse taking bioscience into impact in the real world. Now, more recently, you know, most people know him from healthcare, you know, where everybody knows them. But you've moved into...
How many is on Wegovy right now? Don't put your hands up.
But they have gone now into planetary health, a much bigger challenge, and you're the guy to lead it. So tell us what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm not from Tanzania. I'm from Copenhagen, up north, and I'm part of the Novo Group, as you just mentioned, Philip. So obviously, Novo Nordisk is probably the most famous company in the group, but actually we've been part of Novo Nordisk, Novozymes, Christian Hansen, within LanzaTech and many other biotech companies that we have funded for many years. So Novo Holdings is today the largest planetary health investor in the world, and the foundation is the world's wealthiest foundation. So obviously we need to give back, and that's the part I do. So I fund scientists, biotech companies that are within planetary health through the different programs, through our funding, through our infrastructure. So right now we're located in Copenhagen, and we'll probably expand because we need to deploy more capital.
Excellent. I think it's impressive what we're doing, and for those people, they have financial firepower and they're putting it through the right course. So I'm very glad of this. Now let's go back to the subject. So biodiverse, nature-based solutions. It sounds very nice, but Farhah, let's go back to food security. Do we not need the productivity of the so-called green revolution that was based on automating monocultures and enhancing that and protecting that by chemicals? How do you address productivity?
So, does this work?
Yes.
Can you hear me? In the
Get closer to the mic, perhaps.
In the syntropic systems I put out there is no need for chemicals, neither for fertilization nor for plant protection. And that's because healthy ecosystems just take care of themselves through positive community interactions. But now in terms of productivity, which was your question, where it's been measured in direct comparisons between monocultures and syntropic systems, there's been a 4.2-fold higher total system yield, maybe in some other studies 200%. So clearly it's more productive in terms of edible crops, berries, nuts, fruit, and herbaceous crops. But also you're producing tons of topsoil and a lot of timber products that you can use. I think if I may ask a question to the technocrats here and to the technologists, maybe the problem is scaling and how we would scale it.
Cool, but if you want to scale, I mean, you, Christian, you have, the companies that help the transition, make it faster, scale it, no?
For sure, yeah, absolutely. And I think if you look a little bit into our portfolio of planetary health companies, we believe a lot in precision fermentation. That's the bread and butter of Denmark, if you go back and look at it. And some of the companies we have utilizes the engineering part of biology. So we have companies that goes out and look at the different microorganisms that are in healthy soil, try to isolate them, culture them, ferment them in scale, and sell it back to the farmers. So I think those are a few companies that we have in that space are doing very, very well in order to actually hit productivity, help the farmers, because as the previous panel talked about, the farmers are also under extreme pressure. It's super difficult to change from fertilizers or pesticides to biological products. So that's something we do. And then one specific example is a company we have called Agrobiomics, that are they have found a bacterial strain that will produce something called pitric acid, and it will create an abiotic stress in the plant, so helping the plant cope with stress, which would make our crops way more resilient to the floods we're seeing in Southern Europe, but also drought, which comes after floods. And they can scale because the power of fermentation, and you can do it decentralized globally.
Very cool. Actually, if you're interested in more technologies that help to transition. I mean, we have a very distinguished audience as well as a panel, right? I would like to point out Roman Werner, who heads the food agro biotech at TUM, and he can tell how he does hyperspectral analysis from the sky, how do you do robots to automate mixed environment, how you do more microbiome, etc. as well. And here we have Matthias Berger from Dr. Oetker. Dr. Oetker, as you might know, is extremely engaged in regenerative agriculture, and he helps the labs, he helps projects and so on. So we really have a lot, and Jan Giesbert-Schulze was already mentioned. He not only funds a lot of people, but he convinced the Pope to say, like, let's do it at Castel Gandolfo so every tourist will see it, so we finally get the message across. Okay, now if we get the message across, I do want to get to another very important topic here. That is, food has actually an enormous societal importance, right? Both because obviously, in particular, poorer people, they really depend on cheap, affordable, healthy food, but also farmers, right? And farmers are not just, the guys protesting here in France and Germany, but in much more dire position they are in Africa. And so I would really like you to comment a little bit on the societal aspects of your work, Lavine, that is so important in Tanzania.
Yeah, absolutely. So one societal aspect that's really unrecognized is the profound environmental and socio-economic impact seaweed farmers have. So in Zanzibar, there are about 28,000 seaweed farmers, and about 90% of them are actually women. And the majority of them are actually educated to about the age of 12, and yet seaweed farming provides financial independence. And that's even at in the constraints or around the constraints of traditional and cultural norms. And it empowers them to not only send their children to school, it enables them to have a sense of food security in their own households. And one aspect of this that I think is extremely vital is that they really are blind actors. So they are hidden actors in the amount of impact that they have in terms of the health of our oceans. So to put it plainly, for the last 40 years, they have silently been mitigating ocean acidification. And they have been a huge supporter in marine biodiversity. And beyond that, they have enormous, they really do require a lot of support. And I believe that seaweed has enormous potential to really slot into supply chains and make supply chains more in tune with the environment, and also to make it less land intensive. And I believe that supporting these women will enable us to really do that, to really make supply chains regenerative. They do need your support, and yeah, I think that's the best.
Thank you very much. And we had a DLD Nature, and you also said even the military is funding you because the military understands what a big stress it is on society. Now, somehow it seems we could have it all. I mean, we had Gudrun Bösel here, as you might know, several times, and they say it's an enormous problem going on. They had 3 droughts and 1 flood in Brandenburg. So we will not be able to feed ourselves if we don't get a resilient environment. But you say we can have it all. We can have productivity, we can have resilience, biodiversity, and so on. So what's keeping you? What's the biggest hurdle? Each of you gets 2 sentences to say, in your opinion, what's the biggest hurdle and where can the audience help?
So 1, knowledge gap. For each region, we need trial and error. But of course, the real hurdle is the farmers. We need to get to the farmers, from a practitioner to practitioner, from a farmer to farmer, look at this example, working in Southwest France, and the neighboring farmer can just drop by for a glass of wine and see that it's working. Of course, we're also working with school children, as the panel before us talked. They're planting, they're in the soil with their hands, they're harvesting, and so we're also doing it there from the ground up in education. But farmers, and using each living lab and each example we have as a nucleus for regional change, starting in farmer-to-farmer conversation.
Very good. So, Christian, what's your pick?
I think patient capital, if we don't continue supporting stuff that is hard, we're never going to make any transition. Then we will have Northvolt, and you just had a aviation company crashing. We need patient capital, not just the funny stuff that I do, which is just creating ideas with founders. Patient and long-term capital, governmental capital, critical.
Well, we had a few pounds on that, how to assure the financial part. Lavine, from your side.
I would say transition financing, so instruments to finance this transition, and also favorable favorable regulations that really include carbon credits and bio-certificates are absolutely necessary.
Excellent. So I think this is such a future positive message, right? We can combat climate change, we can restore biodiversity, and we can assure food security. Yes, you need an enormous transition knowledge, transition financing, and so on, but the end is actually extremely productive. So I think this panel and their efforts and everyone who is involved in deserves a huge round of applause. Thank you very much.